All right, Dre. Episode 63 coming up. You know what I think we should get a break to? Aaron Rodgers is washed on 3. You about it? You about it, my friend?
I don't know if I agree with the statement wholeheartedly, but let's do it.
All right. Slumpbuster, episode 63. Aaron Rodgers is washed on 3. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Quiet on the set. Make sure my mic is on. There is Dre and Juju Dog diving towards the pylon. Go for 2, so damn rude. Recognize authority. Spitting tips for fantasy. No way you're outscoring me. Bold predictions with conviction every single day. Sports addiction, no restriction. Kicking game like Pele. He's the greatest. What's the basis? Pick an athlete. Let's debate this game. Outrageous trading places. Sudden death. Take 10 paces. Turn and shoot. Boys the truth. Mamba mentality. Future greats take their place. Dreams become reality. Low and outside, knocked it out the park. Your boy discovered fire like a rock with a spark. Refs acting like Neanderthals. Phantom flags, nothing calls. Heartbreak losses, tragic falls. Every week discuss it all. Settle in, listen up. Free your time like Andrew Luck. Show's about to start. I suggest you buckle up.
Aaron Rodgers is washed. Hey, you heard it here first. I hope that doesn't give too much spoilers away for the later part of the show because we are breaking down some NFC North. But first, your host, Juju Talk Sports, joined by my co-host, MMA Dre. And MMA Dre is going to start things off by breaking down UFC 252. It's going to be a pretty quick show. We're going to talk about that. We got the Stipe Miocic DC Trilogy coming up. So that's been a fight we've been anticipating for a while. The rise of Sean O'Malley has also been a big storyline. He's going to be on that card. And then we're going to, like I said, NFC North, break down that division. Again, 2 of my worst predictions happened on episode 1 of the Slumpbuster. The Ravens, 6-10, ended up 14-2. The Green Bay Packers, 6-10, ended up 12-4. So I took some L's. That was not my best addition. But, of course, episode 1, we've grown, we've learned. Things have changed, and I am just as bullish on the Packers being overrated as ever. So with that said, UFC 252. So starting from the bottom up, we have Magomed Ankalaev versus Ion Cutelaba. Not 2 names that are easy to pronounce by any means, but Dre, 13-1 for Ankalaev, and 15-5 is going to be the record for Cutelaba. Where are you on this fight?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Ankalaev. I haven't seen them fight too much, but there is a new wave of Russian fighters, right? You've got a whole lot of Russian fighters that have some sort of background. Usually it's in Sambo or wrestling, but just in general, they're starting to make some really, really good fighters. I know there's the Emelianenko camp out of Russia itself, as well as the camp that Khabib and a lot of these other guys train at while they're actually in Russia. And then they usually come to do a full camp here in the United States. And so for me right now, not knowing super in depth about both fighting styles or anything, I'm going to go with the Russian Ankalaev.
Okay, well, bantamweight, so you actually do have a personal relationship with one of the fighters, Mr. John Dodson from Albuquerque, Mexico. 22-11 is his record. He's going to be facing Marab. I can't pronounce his last name. I've given up on it, but he goes by the Machine as his nickname. So the Machine versus your good friend, Mr. John Dodson.
Yeah, no, so it's a very hard name to pronounce, right? I think it's Davlishvili, but hey, let's leave it at the Machine. That's his nickname. In this, though, I've got to go for John, right? Like, he's one of the most athletic guys that I have seen. He was also, where he sort of skyrocketed to fame was winning the Ultimate Fighter series. So we actually had 2 guys come out of Jackson's that won that series that he was on. So it was John himself and then Diego Brandao. So both guys from Jackson's were the ultimate winners of that season of the Ultimate Fighter. So I've got to go with John. A few things that, people don't know, like he used to be a gymnast, right? So that adds to his athleticism, his ability to, just move around the cage. And he's so quick, so strong. He's only like 5'2", 5'3". So he's a short guy, but he packs so much power. And again, I think, he sort of has his life sort of rejuvenated in him. He's had, family stuff going, not in a bad way, right? I don't want to make it sound like it's bad, but he just recently had a child and, he's having a great life with his wife and all that. So I think he's rejuvenated. I think he's ready to go. And I think we'll see some good things from him. So I'm taking John Dotson on this one.
Okay, fantastic. And for the audience, didn't know, we were actually talking about this. So you were trained by John Dotson your senior year?
Yeah, a little bit. So one of our high school coaches knew the whole Jackson's camp, right? Because Jackson's was over by a high school in which one of our old coaches was a police officer for. And so our old coach also did a whole bunch of judo and martial arts. And so he's like, hey, come with me over to Jackson Wings camp and, I'll introduce you to some of the guys. So I went over there, met John Dotson right away. He and I, we kind of look alike, right? So every time we're out in public together, we get, asked, are we brothers and stuff like that, or we look like brothers. A lot of people are like, hey, are you John Dotson? No, I'm not. I'm Andre Wynn, right? John Dotson does actually have another brother, right? So Eric Dotson. But yeah, so I got introduced to him, and then we were training for Monster Match and a few other of these national tournaments. And so I'd go in from time to time to work with John, and he definitely helped me get faster, helped me control my takedowns, stuff like that. So shout out to John and good luck this weekend.
So you're saying we could get him on the show?
I could try. I could hit him up.
All right. You heard it here first. Prepare for that interview, Slumpbuster audience. And if it doesn't happen, you know who to blame. At heavyweight. So Junior Dos Santos is going to be facing Jairzinho Rozenstruik. And the last time we saw Rozenstruik, he was facing Francis Ngannou. And to put it, pretty frank here, he went into that matchup undefeated. And 26 seconds later, he was not. That was, we were watching that together. That's by far one of our most popular videos on the YouTube channel. So thank you for checking that out. But Rozenstruik, this is rolling about 3-4 months past that knockout. Quick turnaround in general, but quick turnaround for a knockout in particular. What do you think about his chances against an experienced fighter like Dos Santos?
Yeah, this one I'm a little bit 50-50 on. So this one I'm less confident out of all of the picks on this card, including the ones that'll be to come. Mostly just like you said, knockouts are really hard to have a quick turnaround. And in fact, in boxing, a lot of guys, when they get knocked out, they'll just take a whole year off to fully recover. And so when you've only got a few months, that's kind of pushing it a little bit. Of course, heavyweights, they don't cut as much weight. That really applies when you cut a lot of weight. So you get knocked out down at those lower weights, you're dehydrating your body again. So heavyweight, it's a little bit less of an issue, but still that's a quick turnaround. But with all that being said, I think Junior Dos Santos really is sort of the old guard. And I think, MMA and the UFC has just moved on so much. I think Rozenstruik's still going to pull it out, but barely. Again, that's one of those 50-50 fights, but I'm taking Rozenstruik.
Well, in Rozenstruik's defense, so what happened with Ngannou, we know Ngannou's a monster, and the heavyweight division is probably his to run after this Stipe Cormier fight finishes up. Mm-hmm. In fact, we're probably going to see the next fight lined up for Ngannou is probably going to be, I think it would be if DC wins, he'll probably retire. We'll get a little bit more into that. But what caught him off guard, so it seemed like he was stumbling backwards, got hit by one of Ngannou's just, nightmare punches, and lights out. So anyone can get knocked out. Stuff happens. Very few people have never been knocked out that have fought in the UFC. So I'm not going to hold it against the guy. And he was the number 6 ranked heavyweight coming into that fight too. So it's not like this guy's an absolute scrub. He was 10-0, like I mentioned, prior to that fight. So I think I'm also going to give Rozenstruik the bounce back opportunity. Now, talk about quick turnarounds. And this guy has been a lightning rod in the MMA since bursting on the scene. Maybe it's the crazy hairstyle. Maybe it's the attitude. He's in many ways like a smaller Conor McGregor. But Sean O'Malley, undefeated himself, 12-0. He's going to be facing Marlon Vera. Vera, a less polished record, 15-6-1. But is Sean O'Malley going to push it to 13-0?
I think I'm going to go with Sean O'Malley. Yeah, I think he is. His style, his length, he's just really quick, really fluid, really good striker. And I mentioned earlier there's this wave of fighters coming out of Russia that are starting to get really good. Well, same with Europe. So you've got the SBG camp, Straight Blast Gym, that is really headquartered in Ireland, but they've got some all around the UK and that part of Europe. And so Sean O'Malley's coming sort of out of that camp. I just think he's so good right now, and I do think the UFC is handling his career the correct way, and that Marlon Vera is a name that has some recognition, right? So you can't say like, oh, he's just beating up scrubs, but at the same time, he's not going in and fighting, some really outstanding opponents that, O'Malley has no chance of beating. So I do think that this is a good matchup. I think O'Malley's going to take the win, so I have him going on to 13-0.
It's definitely clear in the marketing that Dana wants Sean O'Malley to be the next big thing. Welcome to the Sugar Show. Like, it's popping. Hey, what's popping? Sean O'Malley's popping. Everything this guy's done in the last few months, I've watched a lot of his interviews. I've seen a lot of his fights. He's quick strikes. He's just fun to watch. He makes it entertaining. He makes it a show. And I'm excited to see what happens for this guy's career. But with that said, don't get ahead of yourself. Sean, you accepted this match on a short turnaround. I think it's only been about a couple months removed since his last fight, realistically. So hopefully he didn't put himself in a corner by doing this so soon.
Yep. One last thing that I'll mention on that, though, is O'Malley was on the opposite end that Rosenstruck was, right? So obviously Rosenstruck was the one getting knocked out, whereas O'Malley was the one dealing the damage. So, of course, he took some hits in there. Everybody does, no matter what fight you're in. But I think it's less of a factor for O'Malley than it is for Rosenstruck in the fact that he was able to end it in the first round. He was the one that got the knockout, and most of the combos were landed on O'Malley's side, not the other way around. So I think it is a quick turnaround. You're exactly right that no matter what, right, like he's still got to cut weight. He's still got to go through a full camp again. He might not be fully recovered from some of those strikes and possibly lingering injuries. But I do think it's less of a factor than the Rosenstruck fight.
Exciting. So welcome to the Sugar Show. Stipe Miocic, Daniel Cormier, the Trilogy fight. So this fight has been on the back burner for a while. If I do recall correctly, they were supposed to fight late last year, they fought late last year, and they were hoping to do this fight early on in 2020. However, unfortunately, Stipe suffered an eye injury that kept him out. He had to miss some time due to injury. And then, we had a worldwide pandemic that also put this fight on the back burner. But fantastic. We got a show in the UFC Apex Center. It's going to be these two legends. As you recall in the last fight, it came down to a sharp liver shot that knocked DC out. Similarly, DC in the first matchup between these two knocked Stipe out. So are we going to see another finish in this fight, or is this going to go decision? What way do you want to see this match finish, Dre? Like, going aside from who do you think is going to win, who do you think you want to win, and what outcome would satisfy you?
Yeah, so from a satisfactory or a pleasure standpoint, I've definitely got to say, of course, you want to see the finish, right? And that's part of what's so exciting about watching heavyweights fight, whether it's in boxing, whether it's in, MMA. Wrestling gets a little bit weirder, right? And you got to know the rules of wrestling. And that's the only, I think, combat sport where, like, heavyweights actually get a little bit more boring. But when it comes to boxing and MMA, right, you always think that there's going to be a knockout. I mean, look at freaking Francis Ngannou and guys like that. Or, Mike Tyson is coming out of retirement. I think to fight like Roy Jones Jr. or something like that. And those guys are always just pounding on people. Still, of course, I want to see a knockout happen. Do I think it's going to happen? If DC plays his cards right, I would say that we actually probably won't see a knockout. And what I think happened in the last fight is I think DC went away from his game plan towards the end of the fight. And that's why it gave Stipe the opening that it did to be able to knock Cormier out. Cormier should have just been applying pressure almost the entire time, taking him down, no matter what. Cormier's wrestling literally is world champion level, right? He was an Olympian. And so if DC is smart, he will stick to that game plan this time. Take him down. Even if you don't get the knockout, just grind him, right? Just be on top, make sure that he can't stand up. Do enough to stay busy in the judge's eyes and in the ref's eyes so they don't stand you back up. But don't do too much that you risk him getting back out. You're on your feet and you risk a knockout. So, yes, I want to see a knockout. Do I think it'll happen? not if DC sticks to his game plan. And therefore, I also think DC is going to win this fight.
If I recall that last fight too, you can make an argument that DC had firmly dominated the first 2 rounds. And as you mentioned, it just a turning point moment where it did seem like he wanted to change game plans with Stipe, and Stipe got a good shot in. And those liver shots, they can definitely be very, they can take an immediate toll on you, drain you of all your energy. And the ref noticed it and had to mark the TKO. There was no way around it. You could definitely tell that Cormier was out of the fight following that hit. So I do appreciate, kind of like you said, DC's fighting style as well, to be able to it's kind of unique what he does with the hand placement over the opponent's gloves. So it does limit taking those hard hits that Stipe can deliver. As far as marking this fight, picking this fight, I think I'm actually going to go against you. I'm going to pick I'm going to pick Stipe in this fight. And I think if you're the UFC, I feel like that's a better outcome. Because if DC wins, he's just going to walk away, and then you have a vacant title. If Stipe wins, Stipe doesn't plan on retiring, at least not that I'm aware of, and that sets up that Stipe and Ngannou rematch. And I would love to see it. I think that's the ideal next fight, and I would prefer it with Stipe as the defending champion than Stipe going after a vacated title that DC had since resigned from. That's at least my preference. What do you think about that?
No, I 100% agree with you. I think if the UFC can have it their way, you're exactly right. They would rather it be Stipe Miocic, right, wins that belt. Then you set up Francis Ngannou. DC rides off into the sunset. Unfortunately, it would be on a losing note, but he can retire. You sort of get him out of the game, and now you just usher in more guys for either Stipe or Ngannou to go ahead and beat up. So you're 100% correct. The UFC is likely gunning for that. But the other thing that I forgot to mention that I think makes that scenario a little bit more difficult is the cage size. So the size of the cage is going to be a little bit smaller than when they were fighting the last time, at least to my knowledge. Maybe they set up a full-size cage. I thought Stipe's camp was going to somehow try to challenge it. But usually the octagon size that they've had in the Apex or on Fight Island, they've been the smaller size octagons, right? So they're smaller by quite a few feet, actually. And so that's less room for Stipe to go ahead and control that distance, control that space, to stay up on his feet, or at least keep his back off of the cage. And now DC, literally, if he just pressures forward in a few good times, he has him up against the cage or on the mat. And so that's why I also think that DC has a slight edge in this fight.
Excited to see the Trilogy outcome. We'll see what Dana's more excited for. Okay. Before we move on to the break and before we give a shout out to our sponsors, I do want to get some quick notes on the fact that your Lakers have now dropped 3 straight. So we applauded them in the last episode, how they had wrapped up the #1 seed. And now they're blowing games to, they lost to OKC, Houston,
Yep.
and the Trailblazers in the last 3 games since we last discussed. So, Dre, are you worried?
It doesn't bode well. And what I was a little bit worried about is that we would let our foot off of the gas a little bit too soon, right? Like, yes, you locked up the #1 seed, and I would say in a normal season, it's okay to do this now, right? Like, hey, we've played our starters enough games through enough of the season. We've had that momentum. Let's rest our starters towards the end of the year. Every team does it anyways, right? But really, like, we had months off. Now you've only got 8 games to sort of get back to playing at that championship level. And now, you're going to have, like, LeBron, his groin was injured apparently, right? He maybe re-aggravated that groin injury. So if that's true, it is the smart thing. Go ahead and rest him. But, like, you haven't played in a really long time, especially as a unit together. And I think you just need that, time on the floor. And right now you can sort of tell that this team is rusty, right? So the Lakers, they're one of the worst percentage shooting teams right now at both, just mid-range field goals as well as at the 3-point. And so it does not look really pretty. I think the team is still talented enough that at the end of the day, they're going to be able to make a pretty good run in the playoffs. but I think it's going to be a lot closer than I would like for it to be in a 1 versus 8 matchup, especially if it's like the Trailblazers, who we just lost to, and we know their guards will go off.
Well, that's the next point. So we have some interesting hot teams right now in this bubble setup. As you mentioned, those Portland Trailblazers, they've looked good. They've looked efficient. Dame's had some hot games for them. And then, surprisingly, the Phoenix Suns are out here with a 5-0 in the bubble system. And then, of course, there's Memphis. Out of those potential 8-seed matchups, who most puts the fear of God in you?
Yeah, so right now, I'm going to say one would be Trailblazers. I have the most fear of, then Suns, and then Memphis. I think we could – I personally think, Memphis maybe on paper is – well, I don't know. I would say Memphis on paper is one of the top 2 out of those 3, but I just don't fear Memphis all that much, and I think they give too much respect to the Lakers right now. Whereas the Trailblazers, they were basically there last year. So they, had made it to the conference finals. They have 2 guys that are superstars. Also, one of their guys, I forget his name, but he's starting to go off.
You mean Carmelo Anthony? God damn it, Dre. Like
another
sports media personality dissing Carmelo Anthony. Get out of here. First ballot Hall of Famer, sir. How dare you forget Carmelo?
Well, that's the other thing.
Talk about Nurkic.
Yeah, Nurkic is doing really well for him. But the other thing is Carmelo too. Carmelo sort of gets into the mind of some of the vets, right? And that they still respect Carmelo for what he had done for all of those Olympics teams, right? And even when he was on, whether it was the Knicks or Denver or whatever, everybody still respected Carmelo, especially LeBron James. And, he's one of LeBron's best friends. And so I think that also plays into some of the mind games. So that's why I'm really afraid of Portland is they can go off. They've got some really good guards that we don't really guard, wings and guards that well. Whereas we have 2 big guys, right? And Anthony Davis, who probably would be my pick for Defensive Player of the Year, and LeBron James. We know they can play defense, but they're not going to be guarding, Dame or CJ. So I think matchup-wise, I'm a little bit afraid of them. And then the Suns are just getting hot, right? So
Carmelo is one of LeBron's best friends, and yet he didn't pick up the phone when the guy needed a job. So I don't know how good of friends they are. And apparently he's better friends with J.R. Smith, I guess. I guess that's the moral of the story. Banana boat, you just see J.R. Smith there with his Henny.
Mm-hmm.
Forgetting the time on the clock, the score.
No, and I wonder, if it was an optics things with the Lakers. I didn't think that Melo would have been a good fit anyways, but Melo's actually doing a pretty decent job in Portland. He can show that he's playing in his role right now. He's not outstanding. But I legit thought that this team was not going to make the playoffs, and they still might miss it, right? There's still quite a bit of basketball to play, and these next few games are really going to determine that. So they may still end up missing the playoffs. But really, without Melo being there and being as impactful as he is, of course, he's not the superstar Melo that we once knew, but he has actually done a, decent, sufficeable job. And so I think it's interesting that, LeBron did pass up on him. And so I wonder if that's going to come back to bite him if we meet him in the first round.
As far as the Celtics go, hot, cold. Start off cold as ice against the Bucks. Jason Tatum, only 5 points, 2 for 17. And then you have a almost 40-point blowout of the Toronto Raptors this past game. So I don't know what to make of my team. At least you have more definitive thing. You can at least say this team is the number 1 seed. So at least you have that in your back pocket. I don't even know what my team's going to do.
Yeah. Well, part of the, one of the things that came about of this bubble in recent news is Ben Simmons ended up getting hurt. Obviously that's not your team, but that means the 76ers will see how good they really are. And so that might open up a little bit more of a pathway for you, right? So even if you flounder around in these first, rounds of the playoff or so, you might end up pairing up against the Sixers, right? And you might be able to beat them. That's
going to be all dependent on whether or not, because that 3 seed is still up for grabs between the Celtics and the Heat. So the Celtics definitely have to do everything in their power to retain that, because you don't want to be on Giannis' side of the bracket You're probably going to have to, of course, square up against them anyway, but you don't want to do it in the semis. Spend all your energy, and then some whack team like Toronto or like the Sixers manages to sneak out of the Eastern Conference. At least that's the goal. That's the game plan. But moving forward, let me give a shout out to both our sponsors, starting first with the number one in men's grooming. That's right, folks. I'm talking about manscaped.com. We're talking about the best ball trimmers on the market. We are talking about the thing that will make everything pristine for you downstairs. And if you're worried about busting a slump, don't worry about it. Manscaped's got you covered. Go ahead and use promo code SLUMP to get 20% off plus free shipping and handling. And then with that money that you saved on manscaped.com, go ahead, reinvest it, put it into your gambling assets, as we have a sponsor named razorsport.com. That's Razor, R-A-Z-E-R sport.com. They're going to tell you where to reinvest, a bubble game, an NBA game, or name this, that, or the other. If you want to bet on two guys throwing rocks at each other, they know who's going to win that matchup. So go ahead and check out razorsport.com. Here's a message from both our sponsors.
This is a message brought to you by the Foundation for a Perfect Package.
Why do I need Manscaped?
Why do I need Manscaped?
Why do I need Manscaped?
Because the only frill I want is the one up top.
Because being in a relationship is not an excuse to be lazy.
Because I like talking ball, not smelling like them.
Because deforestation is proven to prevent forest fires.
Manscaped is the only brand dedicated to below-the-waist grooming.
Manscaped's Crop Preserver guarantees that you smell your best all day long.
Manscaped Boxer Briefs are the most comfortable underwear on the market.
Manscaped's advanced skincare technology makes nicks a thing of the past.
Manscaped is the number one in men's grooming. Subscribers get 2 free blade refills every 3 months. Get 20% off plus free shipping and handling with the promo code SLUMP at manscaped.com. That's the promo code SLUMP at manscaped.com. Get your Lawnmower 3.0 today.
We are the Slumpbusters.
And we approve this message.
I'm LeBron James. No, I'm not. But I'm the king when it comes to sports betting. Bet Razor. Razorsport.com.
All right, guys, we are back. Thank you again to manscaped.com and razorsport.com. Once again, promo code SLUMP and Razor, R-A-Z-E-R sport.com. Now, for the main topic of today's discussion, that's going to be that NFC North. Again, one of my worst predictions, Green Bay Packers, still think that they are only a 6-10 team that happened to win 12 games last year. I think that is the only difference on them. But we're not going to start from the top. We're going to, of course, start from the bottom. And that's why I had to bring in friend of the show, one of the few Detroit Lion fans I actually know, Mr. Deqwan Young, the CEO and founder of Quantity Media. He is here. He is the former host of TPS. Go ahead and check out that episode. Still very rewatchable. Anyway, here's a word from him.
What's up, Slumpbuster Podcast? Today, I'm here to talk to you about the NFC North and the Detroit Lions. Now, usually for me, football season is a time of misery, yelling at the TV, and talking about how the NFL absolutely hates the Detroit Lions. But this year is different. Now, I have major doubts there will be a full season, but if there is, you can count on the Detroit Lions winning the NFC North. They were a 3-12-1 team and finished at the bottom of the NFC North. But that was due to not having your 2020 NFL MVP and Matthew Stafford. This team goes as Matthew Stafford goes. And prior to his Week 9 injury in Oakland, he was on a tear. Unfortunately, he broke his back. Spinal. So the Lions struggled, but they've improved on defense, drafted well, and quite possibly found Stafford his first running game since Reggie Bush. If Stafford plays all 16 games, the playoffs go through Motown. And I'm expecting a magical run. Can you say Super Bowl? If they don't, we can all chalk this up to COVID-19. Back to you guys.
Thank you again, Deqwan. So go ahead, once again, check him out. Quantity Media, tons of great content he is putting out every day. And again, he has to cheer for this franchise. So let's talk about those Detroit Lions. So they're actually under new ownership. So we'll see how they do with that said, but it's not really new ownership, is it? It's basically in the same family. It's still in the Ford family, the Ford Firestone family. Basically, the heart and soul that makes Motown, the Motor City, the Fords. Unfortunately, what they've done with this football team has been less than exceptional, not as good as a 64.5 Mustang, one of my favorite cars, or a 66 Mustang. But yeah, like you can't just put a like glossy new can of paint on this one. This team has been bad, and they've been bad for a while. They've been amongst the bottom teams in the NFC, and I don't know what direction they're really heading in. Because Matt Patricia, this is year 3 for him. He needs to put up or shut up. But what does that look like for Detroit? We're talking about a team that was drafting in the top 5 last year. We're talking about a team that had moments. They finished, with 3 wins last year. But then they traded away one of their best players in Darius Slay. They did draft Jeff Okudah, but basically they just swapped one top-tier corner for another. So that's a bit of a net neutral. So is this team just spinning in circles? What's the direction of the Detroit Lions, Dre?
I honestly don't really know what their direction is, except for, I guess they're just going to be perennially bad. And it's weird coming from the fact that you mentioned the Ford family that has been known for being so great at business and revolutionizing, right, the way that cars were manufactured. You would think that, hey, maybe they would have some success in owning, a football franchise, but apparently it does not translate very well. But like you said, I just don't see what they're improving in Detroit. And unfortunately, Matt Patricia, I had some hope for him. I was actually high on the Lions pretty much all year last year.
And you had them as a top 10 team late in the season, even though they only had 3 wins, Dre.
I know. I don't remember having them that high.
Did you owe them money? Did they have something on you? Is there something I don't know about behind the scenes on why you had Detroit ranked so high and you hated Bills Mafia in spite of a double-digit win team?
They were so I did not have the Lions as a top 10 team. I don't remember them being.
You want me to prove it? I can pull up the tail of the tape. Probably won't because it will definitely slow up this podcast, but I want to say as late as week 8 you had them still in the top 10.
Maybe I did. I don't know. I saw like some glimmers of hope from them that like they were a scrappy team. I think it was Kansas City. They played really, really well. They almost beat Kansas City. Mm-hmm. And so I think I was just like, oh man, Detroit, like if they get it together, they could be so good. And they never got it together. And I still don't think that they have. So for me, I just, you ask about the direction that they're going. I don't see a clear direction. I don't see a clear path. I think they're just going to stay bad.
So some other notable moves that the Detroit Lions made. They acquired Geronimo Allison only for him to opt out on the season as he's a new father, which I guess, you got to give him respect. That's his decision. And if you're talking about playing for the Detroit Lions and you're talking about playing for a team that was drafted in the top 5, can we really blame him too much? Anyway, they signed him away from the division rival, the Packers. We'll get to that. They also released Snacks Harrison, so their run defense is probably going to take a step back this season. What record would it take to save Matt Patricia's job? I guess is another good question here.
I think they've got to get as close to 8-8 as possible.
I don't think that's going to cut it.
You don't think that cuts it?
I think they need a winning season. That's the only way I foresee it. Because what are you going to do if you finish under 500 again? What does that say about your team's direction?
Yeah, I mean, I guess. And Patricia, this will be his 3rd year or 4th year?
This will be his 3rd year, and if I'm not mistaken, they even took a step back from the previous year in the record department. You can say Matthew Stafford got hurt, true, but that's still, again, you don't want to be drafting top 3.
No, I think you're right. I don't know. I still think if you're 8-8, like you said, their quarterback got hurt, right? So Stafford got hurt. They had those glimmers of hope last year until, things sort of just got derailed after the Kansas City game. And so I think if you pull all of that together and you could say, hey, look, we improved. We got up to 8-8 in a weird year where there is COVID. And, you have players that are opting out. And then there was a whole lot of drama, I believe, with Stafford in like a false positive test. And his family's a little bit upset about it.
I thought for a second that Stafford might have just opt out himself, because obviously his wife, very notable story. She had the brain cancer that she was suffering from. So you do have an immunocompromised person in the household. So I don't know how the Stafford family is planning to handle that situation. If when Matt goes out for games, if he's going to take a few days away from the family to test, quarantine, etc. Because that definitely is a scary situation. I'm glad to hear his wife is doing well nowadays. I know that couldn't have been easy for him last season while trying to play quarterback, having his wife just come off, again, a huge surgery, a huge illness, and survive. So, hey, that's what it's all about. But I just don't see this team moving. I think Matt Patricia's done either way. I think that it's almost surprising that he wasn't even fired this past offseason. I was even honestly surprised that he was hired at all, to be honest. Because when I look at his time in New England, what did he really accomplish as the defensive coordinator for New England? You know who the real defensive coordinator is? It's the guy that coached 2 Super Bowl winning teams for the New York Giants as their defensive coordinator. It's the guy that has 6 championship rings with the New England Patriots. It's the greatest coach of all time, Bill Belichick. So Matt Patricia, I understand that he's got his own style. He's got the pencil in the ear. He's got the hat backwards. But I think that's all he really has to his name. I haven't seen anything else from Matt Patricia that says he's a good enough NFL coach. He's Freddie Kitchens with a beard.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's the enticement of the Belichick coaching tree. And we've seen it time and time again, right? Of that, they coach with Bill Belichick. Well, at the end of the day, they're not Bill Belichick, right? There is a reason why Bill Belichick is Bill Belichick and they are not. But it still entices people. We still see so many teams that are we'll even pick up, the special teams coordinator, right? It happens all of the time. But people still love that Belichick coaching tree.
And we see where it went wrong this offseason. The only reason Darius Slay wanted to be traded off the Detroit Lions was because Patricia, who doesn't have the same equity that Bill Belichick does, tried to treat the Detroit Lions like the New England Patriots. And I understand you want to bring that winning mentality, but I hate to say it, I don't think players are tough enough to be coached that way anymore. Do you? I mean, you coach youth wrestling. I'm sure you've had to approach that in a different way yourself with the newest generations of kids. I think that's the same logic for these 20-something-year-old players like Darius Slay, who, even though he's an elite talent, the fact that Matt Patricia would put up his negative game film and show that as an example of where he could improve, I think is one of those old school coaching philosophies oh, you're only as strong as your weakest link, that even your leaders you can mock or criticize, similar to Tom Brady in New England. What burnt that bridge? Well, Bill treated him like he was the same 6th-round rookie back in 2000. And I think that's where Matt Patricia is kind of at a bit of a crossroads. And considering he doesn't have the win-loss record to support him or the results, I think that he's a dead man walking this year.
Yeah. No, you bring up an interesting point about this upcoming generation. I've always thought, I've tried to think to myself of why might that be, right? I don't, athletically, kids are getting more athletic than anything, right? Than what they used to be way back in the day. Coaching techniques and schemes are all getting better. Doesn't matter what the sport is. Things are always evolving, always changing. But what I actually think that could be is social media and the availability for everybody to sort of just message or talk to each other constantly. And so younger kids and the younger generation are able to see these videos or able to see things coming up. And I think the younger generation now is seeing things like, oh, the older generation needs to give us just as much respect as I give them, right? Whereas back in the day, you didn't have things like social media, so you couldn't watch some of those videos to think oh, this is messed up. So you sort of just went in and we're just always okay, coach is yelling at me again. But now, right, you see a video of somebody getting yelled at by their coach, everybody's nah, that's effed up, right? That coach needs to be fired. So I don't know if that's 100% what it is, but I do think that plays a role. And I do think you're right, is even it's starting to leak into, pro sports, because a lot of these pro sports players, rookies, they're younger than we are, Juju, right? And which is the craziest thing is I remember high school like it was just yesterday, and now I'm like, wait, you mean some of these rookies are making more money than I am, and they're younger, like 2 years, 3 years younger than I am? And I think that does play a big role in this, in that you cannot be, a hard ass on these players anymore. You do have to be more of a player's coach, and sometimes that means like I know that I personally have had to take kids out for a milkshake after a rough practice, after I've yelled at them and been like, hey man, like I'm not trying to like just be an asshole to you. Like I want you to do well. I care about you. And that means the world to them rather than just screaming, right? So.
I find that funnier for you to take a kid out of a wrestling practice for a milkshake, considering the sport is based all around like losing weight.
Yeah.
So you're basically saying, I'm going to take you out for a milkshake today so I can make you run twice as hard tomorrow to make weight.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's always a small. I'm like, you can get the small milkshake, the junior milkshake. But I mean, I'm sorry to derail the conversation, right? We'll get back.
No, it's fine. I guess let's just end it with this. Let's tie a bow on it. The Detroit Lions last year in 2019 finished 3-13. This year in 2020, the Detroit Lions will finish with a record of
3-13.
Okay. I'm actually going to give him a 1-game improvement. I have him as a 4-12 team. If Matthew Stafford stays healthy all year, they might be able to squeak it by a few more wins. The big problem for this team, they're in one of the toughest divisions in football, because the 3 other teams we're going to talk about are all tough in their own right. So the next team on the NFC North standings list from last year is going to be the Chicago Bears. Now, I could harp on how Mitch Trubisky was drafted ahead of Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson, but I'm more mature. I've grown to add more nuance to this conversation by saying, how the hell did they draft Mitch Trubisky over Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes? I mean, come on. Awkward.
Makes no sense.
But this team finished 8-8 last year. They had a big 2018, won the division, and if it wasn't for a double doink, they might have been, well, maybe the NFC Championship game, just playing conservatively there. They did rough up the Rams previously in one of their regular season matchups that year. But at 8-8, is this team going to make an improvement? Because one of the big storylines following them, aside from Mitch Trubisky, is regarding Mitch Trubisky, is they didn't pick up his 5th-year option. And they also traded for previously of Jacksonville, previously of Philly, previously of Kansas City, previously of Los Angeles Rams and the St. Louis Rams, Nick Foles. Nick Foles, one of the more unique careers in NFL history, as he's been a backup, he's been a starter on a Super Bowl championship team, and now he's could potentially be the backup for Mitch Trubisky. So who's winning that quarterback job, and what does that mean for the Bears?
I think it's still going to be probably Mitch Trubisky. I just haven't seen a whole lot from Nick Foles outside of the one good season, right? Or not even the one good season, like, the one good stretch of games that he had in the playoffs for the Eagles. So I still think Mitch Trubisky wins the starting job. I think the job is his. And Nick Foles, I don't have a whole lot of confidence anyways in being the backup. So if Trubisky either gets hurt or gets, benched, I still don't see them improving very much. And I think, that's just going to be where this team struggles, is they're going to have to live by their defense, but their defense is also getting older, right? Like they traded for Khalil Mack a few years ago. He has been fantastic. Their whole defensive core, their linebacking core has been great, but those guys are all getting older, and we know how hard defense is on the body, right? Because you're literally hitting somebody every single play when you're on defense. And so I do worry about where this team is. I still don't think that they can put it together offensively.
Well, there are reasons to be optimistic about the Bears on both sides of the ball, aside from the quarterback position. So they did sign a big-time edge rusher in Robert Quinn. Now, Robert Quinn had one splash season where he had close to 20 sacks. And for the most part, he's been pretty average throughout his career. He's been a good pass rusher, not a great one. But when you add him to a Khalil Mack, that really puts a great tandem. That's one of the league's best pass rushing combos that you can ask for. And on the offensive side of the ball, so the new offensive coordinator is going to be Bill Lazor. He's been with the Kansas City Chiefs. He's kind of floated around the league. He's one of those Andy Reid coaching disciples. And then you have John DeFilippo, who was the OC in Philadelphia during their championship season. Or actually, he might have been the quarterback coach. He was the OC briefly for the Minnesota Vikings following that season. The big problem there is he wanted to throw the ball. Mike Zimmer wanted to run the ball. So that was a little bit of a fight between those two. He went to Jacksonville himself, so he has familiarity with Nick Foles. Either way, you have some very talented offensive minds coaching the Chicago Bears this year. Some minds that won Super Bowls, like I mentioned, with whether it be the Eagles or were part of some winning teams with the Chiefs. So do you think that these guys can turn Mitch Trubisky's career around if he is going to be the starter there?
No, I still think Mitch Trubisky is going to be limited, honestly. Like, I think he had one pretty decent season, but again, like, just the skill set that we've seen from him hasn't translated very well into the pro game. So I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who his coaches are, doesn't matter who he has, as offensive weapons. I think he's just a limited quarterback.
Inaccurate, athletic, but not athletic enough. Maybe a backup, but this year, he's either going to be a backup the rest of his career or he's going to be out of the league considering his fifth-year option wasn't picked up. I think he'll get a second chance somewhere else because he was a top 2 pick after all. Okay, so Bears, from 8-8 to what, Dre?
I actually have them regressing. I have them going 5-11.
Oh, okay. We are separated on this one as I actually have them improving and going 9-7 this year. I do think that this division, similar to the AFC North, is going to be one of the better divisions in football. I think that defense with the addition of Robert Quinn is going to be stout. They're going to impose their will on the quarterbacks and offensive linemen this year. And Mitch Trubisky is going to be decent. He's going to be good enough, similar to how they were in 2018, where they weren't winning games with Mitch Trubisky, but he was decent enough to carry them. Okay, that brings us to the Minnesota Vikings. So we've cracked jokes about Kirk Cousins before on the show too, and then Kirk Cousins actually had a pretty decent year, if we're being honest about it. He even had some light MVP consideration at points during the year. The problem is we always judge Kirk Cousins on either the final game of the year, which was the playoffs, where he came up short against the Niners, didn't even manage to throw over 100 yards in that game, or how he does on prime time when the most eyeballs and the most attention is on him. And in those moments, unfortunately for his career, he has shrunk. But that hasn't stopped teams from giving him a lot of money because the Washington football franchise for 2 straight years, of course, gave him the franchise tag, which a whole lot of money there. And then back up the Brinks truck again because the Minnesota Vikings actually surprised everyone by giving him a contract extension. So they're basically signaling Kirk Cousins is our quarterback. We're going to keep him here for a while. And Kirk Cousins isn't offensive to have. Clearly, we've seen you can win with Kirk Cousins. It's just you're always stuck in the middle with him. You don't know really what you have. And I think that's probably one of the most frustrating things about being a team that has Kirk Cousins as your quarterback. You're not really good enough to ever get over the top, but you're not bad enough to where you can just say scrap the guy. So either way, Kirk Cousins is still going to be there. There's going to be a lot of new faces there this year. The Minnesota Vikings actually had 15 draft picks this year. They have a very talented rookie wide receiver in Justin Jefferson because they traded away Stephon Diggs to the Buffalo Bills this year. They released Xavier Rhodes, who was a longtime corner there, and one of the more notable faces of that defense. And Everson Griffin, who was also a big part of that defense, remains unsigned to this point. Wouldn't surprise me in a COVID year if they just managed to pick him up on a cheaper deal. But Dre, with the Vikings, they won this division they didn't win this division last year. They actually finished, if I'm not mistaken, 10-6. Where do you see this team finishing this year?
Yeah, maybe I'm giving a little bit too much credit to Kirk Cousins. Like you said, he usually shrinks in, those big-time games or prime time. But I actually have him going 12-4 and winning the division this year.
I like that. I also have them winning the division, but I don't have them improving record-wise. I think 10-6 is surprisingly going to be enough to win this division. I think that these teams are just going to beat up on each other all year. It wouldn't surprise me if even the Detroit Lions managed to steal a conference or a division win from one of these top teams as well throughout the season. But it's going to be a tough dogfight between these three teams. And I think that each of these teams is going to lose to one of the others at least a couple times. So that's why I had a 10-6 record winning the division. I think Kirk Cousins, again, like I said, is going to be serviceable. He's going to be fine. He may even be a Pro Bowler this year. But do I think that he's going to be the defining factor that's going to make this team finish better? Well, it depends. Are they going to play the Saints at the playoffs again? I guess we'll have to see on that one. Okay, well, let's I don't know if we gave the Vikings enough credit or airtime. My bad, guys. My bad, Skull Nation. I don't know what more to say about your team. I like your team. I just don't know what more I can really add in there. I think probably the best thing I'll add in there is, again, 15 draft picks. They filled a lot of needs. Basically, they drafted a player at every single possible position where they might need someone. They might need a body. So one of the more impressive drafts I've ever seen in that regard. But I think we're going to move on to the Packers because they're interesting and they don't bore me. Anyway, the Green Bay Packers. So I was mistaken earlier. I said they finished 12-4. They actually finished 13-3, which is a big jump up from where I had them last year, 6-10. Well, you know what? I'm going to double down here. 2020, Packers 6-10 again. I am calling it booyah.
Oh my gosh. I got to disagree with you, Juju. I think, we counted them out. Now, I will say it was the quietest 13-3 I have ever seen for a football team. Like, by the time we got to the end of the season, I was like, the Packers went 13-3? When did that happen? But they were winning games where it was like so close or like barely, like it wasn't very, pizzazzy or anything like that. It wasn't flashy. And we could just tell when they got to the 49ers, right, in the playoffs again, it was just like, yeah, I knew that matchup was going to go that way. Like, we knew the Packers were good enough to squeak by in all the games that they did, but we knew they also weren't good enough to be able to beat your Niners. So, I don't know. The Packers were a weird team, but I've got to disagree with you. I think they're going to go 11-5. So, still have them finishing second in the division, but I'm not going to double down. I don't think they regress that badly.
Here's I guess the reason I have them at that mark. As I'm just going through the schedule, I see the wins. They're going to be facing a first place schedule this year, right? So that means, again, they're going to have to play the Niners. They're going to have to play the Saints. They're going to play the toughest teams in the division, in the conference. Mm-hmm. Not to mention how tough their division is as a whole. Like I mentioned, this NFC North is just filled with landmines everywhere you look. And the problem is they didn't do much to help their team from last year. So in the first round, instead of drafting for need, they drafted a guy named Jordan Love, who, I don't know if you know this, Dre, but he plays quarterback. He doesn't play really? He doesn't play wide receiver, which surprisingly is what I was told that Aaron Rodgers was hoping that this team would draft. In fact, he said it multiple times. And when you hear Aaron Rodgers talk since that draft pick, he sounds understanding, but he still doesn't sound too happy that it happened. I just don't understand how you can not help your quarterback after what happened in the NFC Championship game. They got embarrassed. They didn't even draft defensive linemen that could make a big difference to stop the Niners or stop another team with an imposing rushing attack. So I don't know where this team got better compared to last year. And it's been shown time after time, teams that win those what they call coin flip games, the following year they tend to either regress, or if you're on the opposite end of the spectrum and you're a team that won a lot of coin flip or lost a lot of coin flip games, sometimes those teams are set for the biggest improvements. So I think that's where the Packers fall. It's clear that they're not as good as some of the top teams in the division. And who is Aaron Rodgers going to throw to? He only has Devontae Adams. They released Jimmy Graham. Geronimo Allison, like I said, went to the Lions and then opted out. Devin Funches, who they signed this year, he was their big wide receiving acquisition, he opted out. They drafted A.J. Dillon to play running back, but they also have Aaron Jones. So unless you're just telling me they're going to run the ball ad nauseum this year, I don't know what this team did to get better. And I think, in fact, they got worse.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you in that they definitely did not improve. And again, Jordan Love signing is like the, or draft pick, whatever, it is got to be the most puzzling of the entire draft. And you sort of alluded to this, but I don't think you said it explicitly, in that Jordan Love is not a wide receiver. They also did not choose any other wide receiver in this draft, right? And literally a draft that is loaded with wide receivers. I can't tell you how many we saw go in the first round and even into the second round. Like, there's so many wide receivers, like good wide receivers.
I want to say it was either 27 or 37 wide receivers got drafted this year. And the fact that the Packers drafted none of them, of them, it's just shocking. Like, not even just the first round wide receivers. I know that they're saying that the Niners sniped them when they traded up to draft Brandon Ayuk, but still on the board, you still had so many other options. You had Denzel Mims, you had Jalen Reagor, I believe, at that spot. You had other talented rookies, Laviska Shenault, but none of them were drafted to the Packers. And I think that that's just unforgivable for this organization, because we talked about it with the Detroit Lions. What direction is this team heading in? It sounds like a team that's planning for the future, but this team won 13 games last year. So what messages are you sending to not only your fans, not sports analysts, but just the team? I don't hate Jordan Love. In fact, he might be a very talented quarterback. In fact, they might have made the right decision drafting him. But overall, for their franchise's long-term future, but here and now in 2020, if I have to make a prediction based around this year, which we're doing on this show, I think it is a detriment to this organization that they made that decision in the here and now. They even traded up to do it. They were at pick 30 and they traded up 4 spots to pick this guy. So that tells you they thought this one out. This wasn't just some off-the-cuff type of move. They said, okay, if we are in a position where Brandon Ayuk and some of the other wide receivers we like Justin Jefferson, are not on the board, then we're going to trade up and draft Jordan Love. And again, I just don't see how this makes this team better. I think that they were a 6-10 team playing the role of a 13-3 team last year. And I think this year is going to show it.
Yeah. I think the other thing too that, we got to sort of factor in is from a football standpoint, right? Of course, the Jordan Love draft pick doesn't make them any better, because Jordan Love will likely be on the bench for most of the season, if not the whole season. But I think mentally and emotionally, we've seen that Aaron Rodgers can be pretty fickle when it comes to quarterbacks, right? Like, he's not one of those quarterbacks that's like, oh, I'm all about, whatever's best for the team, and we're going to, no matter what, we got to push through. Like, we've seen that he can pout sometimes and he can have an attitude. And so who knows what he's thinking going into the season. And like you said, in recent interviews, he seemed a little bit more receptive to the choices that, the front office and coaching staff made in the draft. But he might still have it in his mind, like, nah, screw this organization, or I don't feel good about this year. I don't really want to play. And it might reflect on the field.
When your quarterback in an interview prior to the draft says that he wants a wide receiver and you don't draft a wide receiver, that tells me everything you have to know about where the organization is versus the mindset of their quarterback. I think in many ways, the Packers, I think they're done with Aaron Rodgers. I think that there's a strained relationship there that is beyond repair. And I don't think there ever really was a great relationship between Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers to begin with. I think that was one of the big narratives that was played into this decision, that Matt LaFleur wants his guy. And if you're Matt LaFleur, hey, you can say, add this to your resume. In my first year coaching, I finished 13-3. But I think that might be your only winning season for a while, buddy. Because, again, I have the Packers. finishing 6-10, and from another popular series on the Slumpbuster podcast channel. They will absolutely 100% suck this year in general. But all right, guys, so that will do it for us here. Dre, any final words for this episode?
No, I'm really excited. I'm glad that we've got sports back. Hopefully the MLB survives. Hopefully the Lakers can, play like an actual 1 seed. And then, of course, with, UFC 252 coming up, I'm super excited for that. So I'm glad sports are almost back into full swing and we're almost back to basically operating as normal.
At Slumpbuster Podcast on IG, at Slumpbuster Pod on Twitter. Use our promo code SLUMP, get 20% off, plus free shipping at manscaped.com, and check out razorsport.com, razrsport.com. Other than that, guys, you stay safe, happy, and healthy, and we'll see you next week.